Thank you so much for our representatives, and I appreciate you taking time out of your schedule once again to join us for this important conversation. As we are aware of, we've had lots of movement within our communities in the last couple of weeks. And we have seen lots of people from our communities joining in and unifying our voices for change. But after we have our peaceful protest, after we've had the thousands and thousands of people coming together, what are our next steps? And that's what we're here to discuss today. So that's actually my first question. In your opinion, or your experience and your knowledge, what are the important next steps after these peaceful protests to effectively and to have effective and sustainable change? Anyone can answer.
I'll take that one, unless somebody else wants to. Okay, organize, organize, organize. Turning out in the streets is a first step, but it is it's symbolic of a movement, not of an organization. We have to keep the pressure on. And the way we keep that pressure on is through as many different channels as we can possibly bring our force to bear, bring our power to bear. We have to bring that power to bear politically. That includes the ballot box, but that's not the only place that we do it. We have to show face, put our bodies on the line at city hall meetings, when our city councils meet. We have to be present when the legislature meets. We have to be on the phone and in writing and contact through email our elected representatives. We have to, that's both at the state and at the national level. We have to make our voices heard in every way. We have to vote with our wallets. We have to make sure that we support those merchants who have made it clear that they're on the side of Black liberation and an end to Black oppression. And we have to make sure that we do not give our dollars to those who have made it clear that they do not support our liberation. We have to make sure that when a question arises that we are in support of our people, or an issue arises when our voices need to be heard, that we raise them. We have to do everything we can to build the capacity of our existing organizations, and when necessary to create other organizations, so that we can bring our power to bear against the structural racism that's kept its knee on our collective necks for these last 400, 500 years.
Yeah, and I'll echo those sentiments as well. I think from a personal perspective, I think it's take the responsibility to really challenge yourself, to really educate yourself on the manifestation and the structural racism and how that literally operates, and also from a collegial and community perspective, really challenge yourself in your blind spots to know what prejudice that you may have, what things you grew up on, what things that were conditioned into yourself that you may be able to reframe and recondition your mind and to become a better community as individuals. And also from a political and economic perspective, organize, as Ms. Camille said, organize and really kind of galvanize and grassroots efforts to bring about change within your community.
Yeah, I would also add that I think that this movement recently that we've seen has also hit communities that have maybe never been exposed to these ideas. And I think that capitalizing on that and to ensure that those communities don't fall back into complacency is another huge part of this, right? Because I think that this could be seen as trendy, right? And we know that it's not. This is not a tool for selling products. This is not a tool to promote capitalist ideas, right? This is, these are real issues affecting real people, right? And I think that for those who don't experience that on a regular basis, it may be easy for them to fall back into their normal daily routines. And I think that it's important to continue these conversations, to especially for white adjacent people like me, to encourage those conversations within my communities, and ensure that they don't forget what we're really talking about.
Thank you. Any other comments? I don't want to miss anyone. I also want to make sure that our audience joining us today know that you as well can ask questions of our panelists. So please feel free to use the chat. Oh, I'm sorry, the question and answer icon at the bottom of the screen and submit your questions. And we want to make sure to try to get those to our panelists. Thank you so much for your feedback on the importance of continuing the same energies that we've had these last couple of weeks. But as you may have seen before, it gets tiring, it gets wearing, and people just don't know the steps, I guess, the next logical steps. It feels like such a convoluted system. How did you all get involved? How did you find yourself as activists? What steps did you take? And maybe that can help to clarify for our participants how they can also continue in an activist role.
Well, me again, I guess. I was literally born into an activist family, so it would have been hard not to get involved. But the important thing to realize is that nobody's necessarily going to come up and say, tag, you're it. It's very important to understand that wherever you are, whatever role you are already playing within your community is the natural role for you to take on. If you are a teacher, then you need to look at where structural racism exists within your role as an educator.
Oh, Camille, I'm sorry. I think we lost you. Camille? Camille? I think we lost her.
She muted herself.
Mute. Camille?
So that you have the power to address structural racism within your job setting. You know, I mean, whatever you're doing, wherever you are, if you're a retired person and you love to read, maybe you should find the
Camille, do you hear? Okay. I hate to interrupt her.
Yep.
Okay.
resurrected. Rosa is not going to be resurrected and come and ring your doorbell and say, come join the struggle. The struggle is here. The struggle is now. The struggle is in your face. Step up and do what you can with what you have, where you are now, and keep moving forward.
Camille, you were cutting in and out there a little bit with the mute on your Zoom here. But I definitely think that we got the gist of what you were telling us, is that it is our role and responsibility to make a difference where we stand and the roles that we have, wherever they might be within our different communities. So I think.
Yeah, I apologize for that. I can also say that there are a lot of organizations already in existence in your community. And if you don't know where they are, you can tune into the news or Google them. Everybody knows Black Lives Matter. Everybody knows the NAACP. Everybody knows the Latino Development Agency. Everybody knows their local church or their local community organization or the public library. I mean, you can tap into something, somebody somewhere who is doing some good for the community that you live in. There's, you know, and if you can't find somebody, maybe you ought to start something.
Yeah, I would say for myself, a lot of my advocacy experiences stem from UCO, just being championed by a lot of the mentors that I had. Being like looking back and looking at my identity and looking back on history, and that really motivated me to not only be a voice, but use my platforms to speak on behalf of people that are marginalized. So that really encouraged me to continue to educate and mentor, and not only mentor, but just model a behavior that's conducive for my community. So that's really the core and the essence of how I began, just kind of just using my voice and my platform.
I would absolutely echo what Camille was saying. I think one of the first steps that people can do is really taking a survey of what leaders and what organizations are already doing work, because 9 times out of 10, they certainly could use more help to continue doing that work. In addition to educating yourself on what the structural and institutional racism looks like where you live specifically, digging into a lot of the great writing and research and things that are out there, blogs by leaders that have been in the movement long before it was popular to do so, and really seeing how they've carved their way out. Like Camille said, it's absolutely the most impactful thing you can do is to start in your area of influence. And so if you are already working in a specific area, that's the area you need to dig into and really see what's going on in that setting that you can start to use your personal position and power to start moving the needle on. In addition to, don't go home after work. Find an organization that you can help amplify what they're doing and really get involved that way, because the greatest impact you can have is by building those relationships with people, building personal connections, because you learn through that, you change through that, and you're also helping to make an impact and amplify work that's already been, the groundwork has been laid a long time ago.
I would also echo something that Norman mentioned earlier, which is the first step is taking a good hard look at yourself and understanding where you fit into the picture and where you fit into your community, much to what Chelsea was saying there. I personally grew up in a very sheltered environment with not a lot of discussion about race, and went to New Orleans following Hurricane Katrina, and was exposed to racism in a way that I had never been exposed. And I had to have that hard conversation with myself of, where do I fit in here? And I think that before you can get involved, it may be the first step to just look at yourself.
Kind of building on that, we talked about having the hard conversation with yourself and the importance of being a voice where you stand in the community, be this in your workplace or where you volunteer, etc. How do you have those hard conversations with the people around you?
I think using yourself as a personal example is often, it helps to de-escalate people when you are going to challenge them on something or try to get them to think about a different perspective. And as both Alyssa and Norman have both mentioned, some of the hardest work is working on yourself, right? Because we all contribute to and hold up systems of oppression. And so taking that inside look to see how you are holding up systems of oppression, how you are contributing to it, and helping yourself learn from that is then how you can help others learn too. So when you're confronted with someone that's saying something that isn't appropriate and is harmful, maybe asking them to repeat what they said so that they might have to think about it one more time, or saying, I heard something recently that it's actually this, not that. And I can see how it might be easy for people to think that because that's kind of what we've been told when we were growing up, or, whatever it is. Having that conversation in less of a conflicting way sometimes can help people to not get up in arms and not feel so offended, because for some reason, white privilege makes people very upset For some reason, the word racism makes people very upset. I wish that we would embrace conflict a little bit more because people grow through conflict. And so just trying to figure out how to have more constructive conflict with each other is actually a good thing.
Like that. I do want to ask this question before I move on so we can make sure to capture it. You all mentioned a lot of different organizations that people can get involved in. Are there some other groups that you are aware of that people can join to help them to make a difference in terms of volunteering, etc.?
Okay, you mentioned volunteering. Ta-da! I have some very specific things that I'd like to announce. On Sunday, the 21st, the Black Lives Matter is sponsoring the Children's March for Justice, which, as a matter of fact, was suggested. Let me get this young man. I'm extremely proud of him. This is my 10-year-old grandson, Isaiah Green, who called me up a couple weeks ago and said, Grandma, I'm a little bit upset because you all are ignoring the voices of children. This impact, racism and police violence impact us. And several other young people said the same thing. So at 3 o'clock, the kids of Oklahoma City are convening at Moon Middle School and marching to Douglas Stadium to say, stop killing us, our lives matter. We need volunteers and we need you to bring your children to this march. And we're also having one heck of a Juneteenth party in the parking lot of Nappy Roots Books, 3705 Spring Lake Drive, shameless commercial, and we could use volunteers for that. But more than that, we also have the Black Lives Matter Youth League, who is continuing the push for the end of violence, both police violence and racist violence everywhere. And by the way, all racism is violence. You don't have to shoot somebody for racism to be violence. The microaggressions that each and every person of color, in particular, the more obviously that you are a person of color, the more microaggressions are committed against you every day of our lives. We cannot escape it. That is the reason Black women die in childbirth, in pregnancy, at a rate 4 to 5 times that of white women in America. That is the reason that the average wealth of the Black families in America is 10 times less than the average wealth of the white person sitting next to them with the same job description and same salary. That is the reason we have, on average, a lifespan up to 14 years shorter than the average white person in this country. We are bleeding, we are dying. Racism is aggression. Okay, and so until that stops, we're talking about violence. Jump in anywhere. There are a lot of organizations, and to list them would leave me breathless. It is a struggle not only against racism, it is also a class struggle. We have to end economic inequality. And so this audience is large. I understand it's primarily an academic audience. A lot of the people listening to this call will go on to become educators. Some of you will go on to become healthcare professionals. The racism in healthcare is monumental, and it's killing people. We're dying because of racism in healthcare. Check that mess, okay? Deal with it. Deal with the structural racism. I don't care whether you get together and have a Black friend that you take out for drinks and all get happy and jolly and sing kumbaya. That don't count for nothing. Attack the structural racism that is within the institutions of which you are a part. Policies, procedures, laws. That is what counts. That is the knee on our necks. Deal with that mess. And it is up to white people to deal with this, by the way, because if Black folks, if brown folks, if indigenous folks could change that mess, it would have been changed a long time ago. It never would have existed in the first place. We don't have the power. Do it.
Absolutely.
Do I sound upset? It's because I am.
That's okay.
Yeah, say it. Say it.
I do want to encourage the panelists, though, if you know of any other opportunities for our community to volunteer, to get involved, please feel free to send that information to the Director of the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, Denise. I'm sure she would love the opportunity to share that with the campus. I want to make sure we have enough time to address some of the questions that have been sent. So, oh, they're coming fast. Let me read it. So here's one of the questions that we received. Mahatma Gandhi used civil disobedience as a tool. Do you all have any thoughts about civil disobedience?
As the lawmaker, I will be the first to say that just because it is the law does not always make it right. And so I think that we have a very rich history, both in the state and in the nation, of effectively utilizing civil disobedience to make sure that policymakers and politicians' attention is on an issue that they have been ignoring and have been making worse. You've seen protests within Oklahoma City recently, and you have a rich history here of civil disobedience starting, I'm sure even before Clara Luper began the sit-ins downtown in Katz Diner. Camille Landry, who is on the call with us and you've heard from, is a great activist and has been contributing to this for a long time, and so many others that are effectively using that as a tool. But as Camille said earlier, it is just a first step. Using that it is really making a statement and getting the attention, and then the hard work is done behind the scenes in challenging those systems and laws that are not right.
I also think that we need to be wary of straying into respectability politics, right? Where we are policing the way that people protest. That is the point of protest, right? Is to create change and to disrupt the system. And how people choose to do that is really up to them, right? And so we can have a whole discussion about peaceful protests and riots and civil disobedience and the way that we frame language depending on who's doing the protesting. But I think civil disobedience is one of the tools that we can use to create change, period.
Okay, I have another question, and it's geared towards the University of Central Oklahoma. So the question is, how do we address diversity on our campus without feeling like we're attacking a department or a professor? From the statement of the individual, they say, I tried to address the diversity of a department, and the response was, it's more diverse here than the rest of Oklahoma. I don't feel like that, because you're doing a little bit better than Oklahoma as overall in terms of diversity and inclusion. That means you don't have room for improvement. Do you agree? I do agree, but I'm interested in hearing what the panelists have to say.
Well, Malcolm has a quote that I think is very apt here. He says, if you put a knife in my back and you pull it out a couple of inches, that is not curing the knife wound. Even pulling it out all the way does not heal me. You got to pull the knife out completely and then heal the wound and then make up for the injury that you caused me. And so just because you're a little bit better than the next racially oppressive institution doesn't mean that you're right. Okay, I'll give you kudos for being better than the institution down the road that has people parading around in blackface. Good for you. But that doesn't mean that the job is done. Go the extra mile and do the job right. Because as everybody's daddy who's ever lived has told everybody who's ever lived, a half-assed job is no job at all. Pardon my French.
Yeah, I think as a former student, it's always imperative that you utilize your voice. And a lot of times, a lot of these things that you kind of get a lot of anxiety by using your platform, because you fear of the consequences that may come along with it. But I think one of the challenging things is really in those spaces is to make sure that you leave a mark for the following students to come. Not just think about yourself, but think about the generations to come. And it's in my opinion, it's your responsibility and your obligation to make that campus better. So utilizing your space and your fees and your opportunities to meet with your professor, also meet with the president, and meet with all the leadership on campus. Is your obligation and their responsibility to hear your voice. So whether you have to get 10 to 15 or 20 students, if you have to use organizational platforms to do that, don't be afraid of the consequences. Just make sure that it's your responsibility, your liberty to let your voice be heard, especially when you're contributing financially to that university.
This has been something that has happened over hundreds, thousands of years. It's not going to change overnight, which means that it's an ongoing responsibility, as Norman said, and we're never done with it. We're never done. So you should be continually working to change those policies, to continue to change them to match the landscape of what the current population looks like. You should continue to be pushing and having those difficult conversations always. That should be policy that is at the top of policy and procedure manuals for any business or institution. And there should be constant work to help develop those relationships and challenge those ideas that have been very immovable. And without that work, they will continue to be immoved, which is what we've seen happen for a long time. When we don't have it in the forefront and it's not that continual work, then people get complacent and they forget that it's happening because it's not happening to them. And they continue to hold that oppression on people who it is happening to. So the work should never be over.
I will also echo something that Camille said earlier, that this is also on white faculty, white administrators to lift up the voices of faculty of color, of staff of color who are working on these things and have been working on these things. But it can't just be diversity programming that is working on these issues, right? I mean, this has to be every department, every program, every curriculum needs to be infused with these ideas, and that can't be done by faculty who are people of color alone, right? And so we need people in positions of power to lift us up. And I think that, that can't be understated at UCO, because for those of us who are working on these issues, we need support in more places.
I think in support of your response, Dr. Provencio, I have a question. The question reads, I agree with Camille. And as a white person, how do I let businesses understand that I won't tolerate the racism that exists? How do I know which businesses to boycott?
There are a number of different websites that are collecting and publishing that. I'm sorry, I'm not prepared to spout off a URL for you, but if you Google it, you can probably find supporters of Black Lives Matter, supporters of Black liberation, or supporters of racial justice, or supporters of Donald Trump, for instance. I don't want to totally politicize this, but get creative with your Googling. Isn't that a skill that universities teach? And you can decide for yourself. There are a lot of resources out there. There are a lot of, for instance, ALEC, the help me, Chelsea. What does ALEC stand for? That a think tank that proposes a lot of very rigid, very highly, I won't call it conservative.
Camille accidentally muted. Oh, you accidentally muted, Camille.
Did I drop out again?
Mm-hmm. But Chelsea did answer your question that you were referring to, the American Legislative Exchange Council.
Thank you. Thank you. And so you can Google businesses that are supportive of ALEC and then avoid them. The Koch brothers that, Scott Tissue, don't buy it. Buy a different brand of toilet paper. And so that your dollars are not going to organizations that are actively working against you. So, there are tons of them. I could submit something to you later, MeShawn, but I didn't come prepared to do that.
No, I think that'd be perfect. I think Geneva appreciate that. And once again, like to share that with the university community.
Also, I think instead of asking the question, which I think it was asked, how do we know which ones to boycott? And just like Camille said, maybe it's who do you support instead? And you can go to the Black Chamber of Commerce. You can go to the Greater OKC Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. There are a lot of minority chamber of commerces all over the nation that have businesses registered with them that indicate that they are in support of minority justice issues. And so I think that that might be a good resource for people as well.
There's also a Native American Chamber of Commerce here as well. And there are some Facebook groups that have popped up. The Black Market is one of them. And it's all mostly local Black business owners who are posting their products and posting how you can buy from their businesses as opposed to maybe some that you have been buying from. So one of the most important pieces is transfer your wealth to people of color, as Alyssa was saying. So, look up and see what banks are Black owned or people of color that have started banks. Put your money in their institutions and find businesses that are doing things that you need. We already have this big movement for buying local, but let's take that a step further and transfer that wealth to people of color. That, we haven't been doing that before. I know that the Black Chamber of Commerce and the Hispanic Chamber have both done a pretty decent job of trying to, pull people outside of their communities into their chambers and trying to make sure that they're part of mainstream business. But it's time that we make their businesses mainstream and make sure that we are putting our money where our mouths are.
Thank you. So our panelists, I want to let you know we have about 10 minutes before we have to wrap up. I'm going to tell you what one of my last questions is going to be so you can start thinking of it now, but I'm a linear thinker. So what I think would really help our audience is if you can give us our next 3 steps. What are the next 3 steps in your opinion for movement, for action after the protest? So that's going to be my last question, and I will give you a moment to think about that while we continue to address the questions that are coming in through the question and answer app here. Okay, so one of the questions we have is, how is the best way to describe white privilege? So the statement is, when talking to family about white privilege, I have been trying to show it in a positive light, that through white privilege, we have all the tools to listen and help without any of the penalties. I have also been explaining it as something we never asked for, but something we have to account for, especially when looking at the opportunities we have been given. Is this a good way to look at it, or is it coming from a wrong angle?
As a Native American person, I am pretty white appearing. So I have a lot of privileges that many of my family members do not. I think that absolutely the majority of time having a privilege makes your life easier. So it could be seen as a benefit, absolutely. I think, as I mentioned earlier, having conversations with people around ways that they have benefited when others have not, or even on top of other people, it can sometimes be a difficult conversation when people aren't used to having that kind of discussion and having that kind of conflict. And so it can be beneficial maybe to put it in that light, but it's also okay to challenge people too. on, you know, the things that they have had in their experience that others have not had the benefit of. And I think being able to explain those things to people through your life and what privilege you have had and experienced can oftentimes be the best way, because instead of you saying, you have this and I don't, you're able to say, hey, this is how I'm actually getting ahead, and this is how I am benefiting at the expense of this group over here. And this is how I'm trying to change that and do things differently so that I am not benefiting at their expense, if at all possible, right? You benefit just by looking white. So you can't exactly change that, but you can change the way that you're doing things to try to even the playing field a little bit. It'll never be even, but everything that you can do and the more people that are doing those things will help start transferring that wealth and those things, the benefits in the other direction as much as possible. So that is what I would say about that.
I think that, well, I'm similar to Chelsea in that I'm a white Latina, right, which is a very different experience than a Black or Afro Latina. So I think that, yes, talking about your own experiences is good, but I've also found, especially when teaching my students about it, approaching it from a systemic and structural level also works, because you're not attacking the person, you're looking at the structures and the systems that have created this over time. But really the best thing that you can do is educate yourself about white privilege and the ways that it does benefit you. And so there are a couple of books. One is Uprooting Racism, How White People Can Work for Racial Justice, Witnessing Whiteness, and then Race Talk and the Conspiracy of Silence. Those are three that I have written down here that I think could be good resources for people.
I would add, sorry, Norman, I want to add one more book to the list that she just gave, and it's called Me and White Supremacy, Combat Racism, Change the World, and Become a Good Ancestor. And that is by Layla Saeed. That's another good one as well.
I'd like another shameless plug. Nappy Roots Books is, I have put together a number of like packets of books, and I'm developing study guides on this subject, and these will be for sale here at Nappy Roots Books as we reopen. Our formal reopening is Juneteenth, Friday the 19th of June, Black Liberation Day, is our formal reopening post-pandemic, and those books and study guides to go along with them will be available. My white privilege does not mean that you have problems. White privilege merely means that you don't have problems because you're white. It's that simple. And most people ought to be able to grok that.
Lately, I've been having a lot of conversations on the history of race and how race, the idea of race is a social construct. So I think if you kind of look back and educate yourself, you can use that framework to kind of engage people and look at the economic disparities and all the things that we've been talking about, how that particularly affects African Americans, and use personal examples on how you can trump that by really looking at the totality of it and how we are created equal, especially if you're a Christian or use biblical or spiritual references. You can kind of use that as an ability to really bring people together and unify everyone.
I want to add, MeShawn, sorry, one more thing. I'm jumping all over the place here. But our artists and our entertainment are also a good place to go as well. There's a lot of Black producers and a lot of groups that are moving to put some great pieces for people to take a look at. There are poets that are doing some great things and some books that I'm sure Camille could certainly recommend on that. There's some movies on Netflix and Prime and all of the streaming that you can watch with your children to help start that conversation. Selma is a really great one. Just Mercy is a really great one. There are ways that you can start these conversations as well that are a little more digestible for people if they're just starting out having those conversations. I've also seen some businesses that have chosen to step up rightly and start having those conversations with their patrons. There's been some gyms that have, asked for their membership to read some books and have a conversation about it. There's lots of ways that you can start challenging that, and just be creative. Educate yourself in a plethora of different ways.
Yes, and I just want to share for our UCO community that, a lot of the resources that was just mentioned, and am happy to add on additional resources, can be found on our Inclusive Community website, Addressing Racial and Social Injustice. There are a number of books, blogs, podcasts, organizations that you can follow, etc., that will continue to inform you and provide you an educational outlet. And I'll be happy to add the text that Dr. Provencio shared, because I think that'd be beneficial for us all to read and know. Okay, we have a couple minutes here, and so I want to go into our last question. Thank you so much for all the information you've given us today. I am sorry that we weren't able to address all the questions that were presented to us from our audience. That just tells me the Office of Diversity and Inclusion needs to host another conversation and continue to provide us these educational opportunities to know how we can engage honestly and continue to move the movement forward. So along those lines, can you please share with us what are our next practical steps in terms of movement after the protest?
I'll say really quick, in my opinion, I think the next steps are to really, we kind of talked about it, is to organize, and then also locally it's very important that you understand the political strategies of things that are going on around you. So look up local elections coming up, particularly here in Oklahoma. Go out and maybe organize wherever level you're at. You can go on the streets and really knock doors, or you can just educate yourself, use your social media platform to really promote and advocate for the issues that you feel are pertinent to you and your organizations and your community. And then lastly, really economically, just really start to evaluate how you spend your money. We talked about it earlier. Really just start with an interest group and just kind of grow from there and really start to affect change the best way you can. I think start small and grow big.
So I think that I have been focusing on what I can do myself, what I can do within the department that I work, and then what I can do in the broader UCO community, because this feels to be the scope of influence that I have at this moment. And so one of the things I'm going to do is actively audit my syllabus, as well as syllabi, as well as encourage some of the others in our department to do the same. And we are revisiting our diversity plan as a program as well, to ensure that we are doing the things that we say that we're doing, and then also adding new things to that. There are a couple of grants and research opportunities that are being pursued in the name of social justice that I think will be beneficial to the UCO community. So these are, things within the scope of my control. So I think that all of the things that Norman mentioned are excellent ideas. I especially want to reiterate the where can we make an impact at the ballot box, both in local and state and federal elections, but then also take a look at those things that you do on a daily basis, and how can you change those, because sometimes those are harder.
Also, I want to add really quick, from a personal level, it's important for us to negate and call out injustices or racism across the board. Martin Luther King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So make sure if you see racism to call it out. Don't be afraid, just call it out.
Camille, do you need to go really quick?
I need to go in a couple of seconds, but let me just second everything that everybody has said. and urge anybody who's listening to this call, obviously, if you're on this call, you're already committed. You've already either got skin in the game or you're dedicated to an end to racism. And that is step number one. As the people in AA would tell you, the first step is admitting that you've got a problem. And that is what America has accomplished, apparently, in the last couple of weeks. That's huge, because prior to this, much of the country was going around saying, race problem? We don't have a race problem. We had a Black president. We don't have a race problem. Well, I think it's in most people's faces now, so we've made a huge leap forward. It's very important to keep up the pressure, to not let this die down, to not let it be a passing fancy, a fad. It's very important, more than that though, for us to organize, 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 for us to attack structural racism and not let this become a personal thing. The governor, the mayor both held forums where they talked about feel-good kinds of things. I've got Black friends. We need to have dinner with each other. We need to get to know each other. That is important. I don't mean to suggest that it is not, but racism is a structural issue, and we must address its structural roots if we're ever going to make a difference. The enormous amount of human potential that is lost due to structural racism is what is the thing that is pushing America down. That is the collective knee on the necks, not just of Black and brown and indigenous people, but of the whole country. It represents not only lost potential, but lost wealth. The cure for cancer is in the minds of some young Black kid who is attending a school with an unqualified teacher, substitute teacher, and no textbooks. Okay? The ability to solve our energy problem is in the mind of a young Latina who is attending school but is not being able to learn because nobody is teaching her in a language that we're wasting our potential, and it's wrong. It's wrong on every level. It's wrong morally, it's wrong economically, it's wrong practically. We need to quit that stuff. So again, do what you can with what you've got where you are. Organize, keep up the fight, jump in where you can, attach yourself to an existing organization or create one. Thank you. And thanks for inviting me.
Thank you, Camille. I'm going to give some pretty specific things for people to do. I love that we've covered individual, like what I can do myself, what I can do at work, and the overall just kind of being more engaged in general. However, I am the politician in the room, so I would be remiss if I did not specifically cover what you immediately need to do this month. The first thing is you need to sign up for an absentee ballot by June 24th, which is the last day, and or make sure that you look at what your ballot is going to be if you vote in person on June 30th, and you can do all of that from the Oklahoma voter portal. So if you go to your little Google box and insert Oklahoma voter portal and search, it will pop that link up for you to go to your portal. It will ask for your first name, your last name, and your date of birth. And once you get through into your portal, it will show you where you can go to vote. It will show you who your elected officials are on the city, county, state, and federal level, which is how you can find out who you need to talk to about specific issues or needs. I hope that all of your elected officials are hearing from you about what you would like to see differently and how you would like policies to change to reflect the importance of Black lives and other people of color in this country. And then the census is also extremely important. Oklahoma historically has had dismal representation on the census. We're usually close to the bottom in the entire US in terms of number of our population that fill it out. We're still sitting in the mid 40s right now. So we have a long way to go. A lot of people in rural Oklahoma specifically have not filled out the census. So if you have family or friends that live in Godebo or Wellston or wherever, then call them and ask them if they've filled out their census yet. If you're guilty, fill your census out, because it's vitally important. That's how we get federal funding for all of the programs that we're able to provide, not just Medicaid, but tons and tons of other stuff. So get the census done and then vote. June 30th, you're gonna have your primaries on that ballot. I suggest that people sign up for an absentee ballot at the beginning of the year in January and sign up for the entire year. That way you never forget that there's an election, because we have on average about 4 elections a year. Nope, there's not just a presidential election, there's tons of others. And what most people don't realize is that the other elections for your city, county, and state are actually much more important than the presidential election, because the majority of things that are decided about your life and how you're gonna live it are decided at the city, state, and county level. So that means we need to get to know our city, county, and state officials, and you need to do that ASAP, because primaries are coming up in about 2 weeks, which means you have to decide out of 2 challengers potentially, depending on whether you're Republican or Democrat and who signed up for those races. And then in November, you decide who's going to represent you at the state level. And let me just tell you, as a member of the minority party, there are lots of policies that didn't happen this year only because of COVID that would have been really awful. And all of those are decided by the people that you vote for. If you aren't voting, then you're letting someone else make the decisions for your life, and then you have to deal with the consequences. And even if you don't have to deal with the consequences, people of color definitely have to deal with the consequences. So if you don't want to vote for yourself, vote for them.
Thank you so much again, panelists, for your wisdom and your direction and information. We learned a lot, we heard a lot today, and it's just another portion of the conversation that's really important for us to have. So thank you. I'm going to turn this back over to Director Denise.
Thank you so much, MeShawn. We definitely appreciate you. We appreciate our panelists. Camille did have to step out just a little bit early, but I just wanted to announce to our attendees that if you haven't registered already, please do so. The ODI is hosting another event on this Friday, which is June 19th at 2 p.m. entitled How to Support Your Students During Social Unrest. And I encourage you all to make the time to plan to attend. Just as today we heard a dynamic and just incredible wisdom and advice from our panelists, we will get the same on this Friday as well. Thank you all so very much. We appreciate you, and we will be talking to you all very soon.